All right. Hello, everyone, or anyone who's joining us. Hi, Mandy.
Hello.
So just to introduce myself before we get rolling here, I'm Sapna and I'm a registered marriage and family therapy intern from Austin, Texas, current PhD candidate and co-founder of Zession. And I'm joined by my colleague and friend and fellow co-founder, Mandy, and I'll let you introduce yourself more formally here in a minute. But we are here to have a conversation around a particular topic. You and I have a lot of conversations as partners and friends and colleagues. But one thing that you had brought up was around the concept of curiosity in couples and the role that that plays. And so I was curious about that curiosity. And so I wanted to have a conversation around that that could benefit other people and couples, individuals out there who may not have considered this topic, because I don't think I would have if I was not a therapist in this realm, and even if you and I have not had this conversation. So I'll let you introduce yourself a little more formally too, and we'll get rolling with some of my questions.
Yay, I'm excited. So, as Sapna just introduced, I am Mandy Rourke, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, also in Austin, Texas. I have a private practice here in Austin, and I support individuals and families, but I would say that I specialize in working with couples or people in relationships. And so, as Sapna was saying, we've talked a lot about just the way that we approach our work with couples or individuals. And one constant theme that does come up is around the theme of curiosity and how do we actually remain curious as people. And today we'll probably talk more about romantic relationships, but really it's just relationships in general to me of
Yeah.
just yeah. And I think what you were saying about this is it maybe something that people naturally think about? Maybe some people are natural curious people, curious like a cat type of folk, but I think as a therapist, that is something that was part of some of my training as well, was how to sit in a place of not knowing and to be curious with each session and also each individual. So I am super passionate about it. And I think that we'll have a good conversation to see how others can kind of think through their own relationship through this lens of just curiosity. No
Yeah.
pressure situation. We're just being curious here.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I think it also like you said, like it's something that we kind of have training in as clinicians. And so as far as how other people can develop it, I've got questions. So I'll first start off, and you started to touch on it just now. But what makes you think that this is like a significant concept for couples to use? Are there things that you've noticed in like your work with couples, over the years, or like what have you picked up on that's made you realize like this place of curiosity is significant?
Yeah, I would kind of refer to it as a superpower and one that we can easily access if we choose to. I do think it takes a little bit of work to kind of think through what that looks like and how you individually apply it to your relationships. But I think to kind of start with relationships in general, relationships can get really stuck in patterns of how they function. And as I'm describing this, I'm also thinking about the relationship as separate from the individuals. It's kind of, I mean, the individuals are part of the relationship, but both of those individuals within the relationship can also look at it as its separate entity and kind of wonder, well, what's happening within this relationship and why? And how is this relationship naturally functioning? One thing I always like to think about is how relationships are kind of similar with bikes. And just if a bike, you're riding along on a bike, you're going to be in whatever gear you're in as you ride that bike, unless you choose to change gears. And I think it's kind of confusing when you are in a relationship, you can get so stuck in a certain gear that it's like a blessing and a curse. Like, I know this person so well, like I know what to expect about them, or I understand how they feel on most things. It's almost like when people say it's, oh my, like they complete that better half of me, and they have this just, or I know you better than you know yourself type of line. And the reality is people evolve and change, and relationships evolve and change too. And that's where I feel like in my work, I see a lot of couples who are just, they've been in whatever gear for however long, and maybe tension is growing, maybe disconnection is growing. And it's interesting how we naturally as people just kind of continue to truck along in that gear until we decide, wait a second, we need to interrupt this and shift this into the higher level gear. And I think the higher level gear here is around curiosity of like, well, what are we needing? What are we feeling? And how can we really move this relationship into a different way of just functioning overall?
Yeah, I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I love that metaphor of the bike gears. That makes it so much more tangible in my brain too, because you're right. We do kind of just tend to, like, as humans generally, but also in our relationship dynamics, especially ones that we interact with on a regular basis, just kind of fall into these patterns, these habits. And so I think getting into a space where we're not just making automatic assumptions is challenging sometimes from my perspective, given that our brains tend to look for patterns naturally and inherently, and usually like use assumptions as a way of kind of conserving our brain space, making things more like feel more predictable and safer. And so stepping back from that is not always the most natural thing. And especially when you add like tension and, kind of conflict in that equation too, it can make it harder. So before I go down that road, I want to back up a tiny bit and ask what, when you say curiosity, like what does that actually mean? And what does it look like? Like, how might it be different from those kind of everyday patterns that we're in on a regular basis, I guess?
I like it. I think it's always good to start with defining what specifically is curiosity, because I think when I think about curiosity, it's like, well, is it just as simple as saying, what am I feeling or what's happening here? And I think that's part of it. But I think curiosity is coming from a place of not knowing and a place of observation with the desire to learn and better understand a situation, or to just gain more information to know more about what's happening at hand. So I think it's as we talked about, even talking about this topic, I thought curiosity seems so simple. Really, it's like, oh yeah, I'm being curious. I know how to be curious, but I think to me, it's really the essence, and maybe even a philosophical way of approaching your relationships, of being like, it's okay that I don't know. And what I do know, it's not necessarily the absolute truth. And so having a lens of curiosity is saying like, I'm okay with not knowing. And I also have a sincere desire to know and to learn more in this situation. And to me, it's that superpower again, because if I am with my partner and I've been with them for 15 years, as time goes on, that curiosity could fade. I see him every day, kind of know how he, functions day to day. And so it is something that you have to almost like remind yourself, or even consider as a relationship goal or focus of how can we remain curious as partners with one another, which means how do I learn more about you today, try to understand you better today than maybe how you were, 10 years ago, because who you were 10 years ago, I'm sure you can relate to this to some extent, like we grow, we change. And for whatever reason, a lot of individuals within relationships and couples I support, it's just that natural tendency to kind of just fall into, this is just how we are. But the reality is there's so much more happening. There's so much more room to learn and to understand things from this moment, not from 30 years ago when y'all first initially kind of established your foundation.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts. I especially we'll see if I can keep them in my brain.
Mhm.
Um, I especially love you bringing up like that feeling of it's okay to not know, because I think that's like a huge, probably first step for a lot of people, I would imagine, of like feeling like feeling like you have a grasp of a situation, you're even the expert in a situation, oftentimes is its own coping mechanism for so many people. So even getting to the point of like feeling okay admitting that you don't always know what's happening in a situation, especially in a dynamic with another person, especially someone that, again, you're interacting with on a regular basis, can be scary to admit. And so being able to get to a place where you're okay, being like, okay, it's okay that I don't know. This is opening space in my relationship so that I can understand better where they're coming from. I think is really, really big. And then kind of coming back to what you were saying about it can look really different based on who we were before versus who we are currently in this moment. And especially, over the span of a relationship, I was curious about that too, of like, does the role of curiosity from your perspective, does it look different and operate differently when you're in a relationship and you're first starting to date, or you're engaged, or newlyweds, or at the start of your relationship, in whatever format that looks like, versus you've been with someone for 10, 15 years, or longer? Are there shifts in what curiosity looks like, and the role it plays?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to bring up because my mind was bouncing all over the place and thinking of how curiosity may show up differently. And the first thought that came to mind was there might be just a natural level of curiosity when you first meet someone. It's like your brain's almost like this fresh slate. Nothing has been written down necessarily about this person. And so maybe there is just kind of a natural desire to know or learn more about this person. I think it's vital in the beginning to be extra curious, because I certainly know with working with couples who or individuals that are working through dating and everything, it's even curiosity into like, this feeling of lust that you have for this other person. Like, where is this feeling coming from? What are there any other connections? Are there any other experiences you've had in your life that have been similar to make you feel this way? What is it about this person that really draws you to them? And so I think it's curiosity about the other person in the beginning of dating, but it's also curiosity about yourself of, man, every time I'm around this person, I feel a little uneasy. Am I excited? Am I not? But I think as humans being after, just kind of fill in the blanks of, oh, I must like, okay, this is what it feels like to date from the first time. But I feel this feeling of lust, but I also feel this feeling maybe of like nervousness. Like, how do I kind of tap into that? And I think if you almost just allow yourself the ability to say, I don't really know what's happening here, going again to that place of not knowing, but I want to be curious about what my experience is, what this other person might be feeling, or, just their general kind of inner workings of their experience too. But as we think about later in relationships, I think that's where it becomes almost more, I think it varies with each relationship, but I think it may take a little bit more work, kind of based on what I was saying before, where, all right, we know each other really well. I mean, I think about this with friendships too. It's like, well, we've been friends for 20 years. I kind of have a sense of who you are and understand you, but there is an added bonus, I think, of being extra curious to just like open up the opportunity of more to connect upon, more to understand, or just more excitement, more wonder about the relationships. So yeah, I think it kind of
Yeah.
varies.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There are different stages. I love the idea of curiosity, not just about the other person, but also just remaining curious about your own experience too. I do think that it can be that much more challenging to really track with what another person is feeling if you're not even really sure kind of where you're at too. So I think that's another important, and I feel like a lot to ask of a person too, of like kind of tracking with yourself where you are, staying curious about your own experience, not brushing things aside or making assumptions about your own experience. Or sometimes, we can often gaslight ourselves and be like, oh no, I don't actually, I don't need to feel that bad about that situation, when it's a very valid feeling. And then also allowing that space to your partner, and then that changing over the course of multiple years, and being more intentional about bringing in that curiosity when it can feel like a habit. the interactions that you have, the way that you feel like this person operates. It kind of reminds me of this article. I apologize, I don't remember if it was like Washington Post or New York Times or like the Time, whatever, but it was from a couple years ago. You might have read it potentially of, or it's becoming more of a common concept as well, of like thinking of, especially in the context of a long-term romantic relationship, but really, like you said, any relationship that's longer term as well, thinking that you are going to be with someone for like the same person, but making sure that you're thinking of it from the perspective of you're going to be with a different iteration of that person every couple of years, and throw in kind of crazy life events into that, it's going to change maybe that much more. And so thinking of it from that perspective, like I need to get to know this version of my partner, because they're not the same version that they were 10 years ago for sure. Maybe not even like 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe not even yesterday, depending on the situation too. And so I appreciate that. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think on that note, just something to jump in is it
Yeah.
makes me think about how, as a mom, I can see my child, and I've witnessed her development and her growth, and and just thinking about how I experience this relationship and how I attend to this relationship is a pretty ongoing process of being curious of how is she different? What other needs might she have now? Or what's different about her experience as a elementary school kiddo versus when she was a baby in the crib? Because I for certain know that what used to work for her when she was a year old is not at all working for her years later. Things naturally transition and shift. And I do find it kind of fascinating how in that type of life event, it's just, I don't really have any other options but to learn and to understand and kind of follow alongside of her development. And I just wonder what could happen and the possibilities if we considered that within our relationships as well, to exactly what you're just describing of it may not be as obvious from where I am today or even 5 years. It's like, oh, I'm kind of still looking at the same person. Maybe they got a new job, maybe some other life event has happened to them, but it's not like as drastic of a change. Maybe from 30 years to 60 years or something, you might, okay, yes, there's been a lot happening, but when you're in it, it's almost like, oh, we're adults now. So, and it can feel fixed. Like this is where we've arrived, and we don't consider, well, we're adult version A, and then we probably have adult versions all the way to Z, which is exciting, but also it's something that's, I think, again, an opportunity to be like, how do we just in whichever relationship, almost like view it as you're not a parent to it, but if you look at it through the eyes of how is it developing and evolving, I think that can be a helpful way of considering it as well.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up. I love that, because it's almost like by coming from this place of curiosity that becomes a lot more natural in the context of something like your child, who is literally changing from day to day, week to week, month to month, very drastically. But approaching your romantic partner from that perspective is like opening up that much more space for their growth and their development, and their evolution, I guess. And so they may not evolve into who you were hoping, who you were thinking, the direction that we all necessarily want to. It may be in different directions from you, but it is opening up that space to honor that growth, that development, that shift, that change, on a regular basis. And I also appreciate, because it also reminds me of like this concept of like, again, if you're seeing someone on a daily basis, like even just yourself in the mirror, it's hard for you to notice changes in yourself if you're seeing it on a regular basis. But someone who hasn't seen you in 6 months or 3 years or whatever, it's way easier for them to see the difference. And so kind of a similar concept of like, you may not see the shifts and the changes in your partner or even in yourself on a daily, regular basis if you're not looking for it and like, leaving space for it. It can be really hard, but they're there. usually. And so honoring it in a similar way that you would the growth of like a child that's a little more drastic, is giving that space. I like that a lot. um, I think another question I have is, like, what does it actually, how does one get into the headspace of actually being curious? Like, especially if that's not something that one is used to. If we tend towards kind of like that, what we call black and white thinking, I know that's a little more of a clinical term of like kind of putting things into boxes, of, things are either this way or that way. There's no gray in between. And I think part of that curiosity from my perspective sounds like kind of opening that space for that gray, which is not always the most comfortable. But can one get in the habit of that? What can that usually look like, especially in the context of your relationship and your dynamics with a partner?
I think that's a good question, because I think it is a potential shift that people have to make. And it's more of like, how do I want to relate to this experience, and what more out of life or this relationship am I needing? And I think that it's just first kind of contemplating, is there a change necessary in this relationship? Are you starting to feel some sense of disconnection or discomfort, or tension, like you were kind of referring to as well? And I think that it's first just acknowledging like something maybe does feel a little fixed, or something feels a little too on autopilot. Could be one way of starting to acknowledge that there's opportunity to shift away from just being an autopilot, because that is just, I mean, it's just a natural way of being, really, of like, okay, rinse, wash, repeat type of feeling. But if you feel that way, I think it's a good time to just pause. And even as you're just describing it, it's like, how do you have space from whatever it is that's happening in that moment? And I think it goes back to looking at the relationship as like, what's going on in the relationship right now? And part of it is stepping out just to be able to almost watch it like it's a movie playing out in front of you. And I think, to me, it's having some visual strategies like that of, I could easily just react or respond to my partner, to the situation, how I normally would. But if I'm feeling some sort of tension in that moment, or even tension from the other person, I think that that's kind of your cue of like, ooh, something just feels a little icky or a little tight here. Well, okay, how can I give space just for a moment to learn a little bit more about what internally is happening for me, and then what also might be happening for the other person too? So I don't think there's like a step-by-step process necessarily. I think part of it is really just saying like, I kind of am seeking some change, and I want to feel something fresh in my relationship, or maybe I just want to feel free from feeling so stuck in this autopilot.
Yeah, I'm hearing that there's a lot of different, kind of cues for us in these dynamics to kind of understand like these are opportunities to be a little more curious here. Whether it's just recognizing that we're on autopilot, which can be tough too, because that's a place of safety and security for some people. Like, for those who are creatures of habit or have partners who are creatures of habit, it can be really tough to break out of that. It can feel like extremely uncomfortable to kind of zoom out and be like, I don't know that we need to. But just knowing that that is an opportunity for the chance of novelty. That's another thing that I'm hearing, I think, too, is like the opportunity for creating novelty, and especially in the context of longer term relationships, or relationships that does just tend to get into a little bit of a rut. Novelty, I know, brings a lot more excitement into a relationship and joy, and it keeps things interesting and fresh, and engaging. And so this is like a really small way, it sounds like, of how bringing the opportunity to introduce more novelty into your relationship, especially if being curious or coming from that place of curiosity is not something that's common or natural for you and or your partner. And so, hearing that autopilot is an option. Also, if there's any like discomfort or, frustration, like conflict inside that you're feeling, with regards to interactions with your partner, that can be another place to be like, okay, stepping back, curious about what I'm feeling, what's coming up for me in this moment. And then also like what's maybe going on for them, what maybe even assumptions am I making about what's going on for them, and taking another step back to be like, okay, is that actually accurate? Do I know for a fact that that's true? And needing the same from your partner too, because if they're not staying curious with themselves and able to share with you what's actually going on for them in that moment, it makes it difficult too. And then I like your concept too of zooming out like a movie, like it's kind of playing out in front of you. So you're able to just kind of sit and watch like what's happening and be like, why is that character going into that mode right there? What's happening? What's the reason behind that? Is it really because of me, or is it something else that's going on in their world that maybe they're not able to articulate? Pardon me. And so yeah, I hear a lot of that. And it also makes me curious about the difficulty that can happen in like becoming curious in those instances when we might already be on like the defensive. For example, if there's conflict, it would be really hard, I think, especially if it's not something that I'm accustomed to for me to, because it takes a sense of like compassion and intention and just feeling a little calm to be able to get to that headspace of being curious, right? And so I would imagine if there's conflict, if I'm feeling I'm on the defensive because I'm feeling attacked by my partner in some way, it's going to be hard for me to get to that place. Is that something that you notice and or not notice, or like what would you say for couples who are dealing with that?
I think that's a really good example to bring up, because to your point, that's oftentimes when either one partner or both partners are in an escalated emotional state. So conflict is maybe already brewing, or there's certainly discomfort and tension in those moments. And it can be really hard, almost impossible sometimes, to actually slow down, pause, be curious about your emotional experience. And I think that first is just okay to acknowledge that, like, this is a process of even knowing when you're feeling escalated is part of the curiosity of like, whoa, I just got super defensive about that. What just happened? And it could be that you just start noticing, that it's happening first. I think the other part of it though is maybe thinking about things through the lens of what if. And I feel like those what if questions can be really helpful. And so just to give you an example, in working with a couple that has dealt with a lot of conflict, if the narrative or like the storyline of how someone feels about themselves is, I can't do anything right, or I'm not good enough. And that might be an individual feeling that they have experienced in their lives, separate from the relationship or mostly in the romantic relationship. And so in moments where a partner comes in and fixes the way that the other person has, prepared dinner, or some small moment can actually turn into, oh, well, they must not think I can do this, or I'm not good enough. And so I think the strategy, if you will, around this curious approach is to just be like, whoa, I immediately assume that. Okay, interesting. What if I'm not right about that? What if what I'm feeling and thinking isn't actually how my partner is thinking? So it's just even saying like, what if there's more to this than what I'm initially feeling? And I think it goes back into, wow, what happened that really made me feel so defensive, or that I had to defend? And so to me, it just really ties into it being a process that it's not something you can perfect, but I think maybe there's some freedom in the position of, what if I just don't know right now? What if I just don't know why I feel so intense about what just happened in the kitchen at dinner time, or whatever it might be? It's just starting to essentially shift to that place of I'm at least starting to just watch and just start to wonder, is there any more that I can learn about myself or what just happened here, so that I don't have this ongoing feeling of defensiveness or this ongoing kind of eggshells or tension. It's kind of how I would think about that.
Yeah, I appreciate the emphasis on it is a process,
Mhm.
and hindsight is 2020, and
Mhm.
curiosity and hindsight is definitely part of the process, I would imagine, pretty significantly. Um, I like that. I think um, just starting to use that curiosity again. I'm hearing a little more. I think about starting with yourself, and especially paying attention to. I know you and I are more familiar with this idea of like the stories that we tell ourselves, about our relationships with other people, about what's going on with our partner, and staying, aware of, okay, am I telling a specific story right now? How's that affecting how I'm feeling? And is that story accurate, period, but also especially, not necessarily especially, but also, is it accurate for this other person? Is that actually where they're coming from of, they don't think I can do this? Or is that a me thing that is a thought that I automatically tend to go to, or feeling I automatically tend to go to, that maybe I need to check a little bit more, and maybe where are they coming from? Um, I know Brene Brown uses that phrase a lot, right? And so it reminds me of like, have you seen her Netflix special,
Mhm.
right? Okay,
Mhm.
that story that she tells in her Netflix special
Mhm.
about her and her husband like swimming, and
Mhm.
she's thinking things are going well, and then he's being like really, one word, standoffish, and she's like, okay, this must be about me. And she asks him about it later on. Spoiler alert, if anyone hasn't watched the Netflix special, she asks him later on. She tells it way better too, though. That like what was happening. She's like, I was having a panic attack. Like I wasn't able to focus on anything else. Like, and she didn't get that because she was, in her own story, he was in his own story and experience. So allowing that space for that curiosity, and even in hindsight, in that moment too, and even with your partner as well, it has a lot of value, too. And so, um, curiosity about our own narratives, and then just recognizing it is a process, it is a practice, right? Of getting in the habit of being curious, feeling comfortable in sitting in that kind of gray space of not really knowing, and that being okay because it's ultimately something for your own growth and your benefit, and the benefit of your relationship too. But again, can be really uncomfortable. Um, and so, as how would you encourage a couple, an individual to over time be able to maintain this sense of curiosity? Because we talked about these habits that people get into, right? And kind of these, ruts or these patterns of dynamics that we get into, where we might start off really well with this curiosity, as naturally, in a relationship, but at the start of a relationship rather. But as we go on, how can we stay intentional and continue to bring in this sense of curiosity over time? How can we maintain that?
I think it's, I mean, very, very good question, because if we do look at bringing anything new into your life, it can feel a little challenging to see, how do I actually execute this? And I think, as we're saying, like, be curious, try curiosity. It feels simple and it feels like, okay, yeah, I'll be curious. But it's like, when you think about just the process of change, how long do you, okay, I was curious that day, and then I was uncomfortable, perhaps, like what you're just
Yeah.
saying. And so it's like, I don't, whatever, I'll just kind of, maybe not even thinking in these ways. It might just be that natural, like I'm snapping right back into that autopilot because I didn't really feel like I could shift into a different gear. And so I think first it's just important to notice that, that process of change will have kind of the ons and off type feeling. And as we work to live in that gray, like you were describing, I think it's a metaphor, or not a metaphor, an acronym that comes to mind here. It's from one of you're mentioning Brene Brown, amazing thought leader, another awesome thought leader, Dan Siegel. He's an interpersonal neuropsychologist that has so much interesting work. And one acronym that he shared when I was first learning about mindset and kind of all of his approaches is COAL. So C stands for curiosity. So we've talked a lot about curiosity, but something about the structure of having that word helps, because O is when you have a moment, you're curious in it, but you also, the O stands for openness. So there's this openness and just kind of, okay, maybe it's that openness of, I don't really know what's happening here, but I am open to just kind of allowing myself to figure it out. And then the A stands for acceptance. So I can accept that maybe we weren't able to shift into a different gear here, and the conflict still is as it was before, even though I'd rather it not be. I can just kind of accept where we're at in this current moment without any real judgment or criticism, which leads to the L, which is love. So it's like I am in those moments trying to love not just my individual process, but the process of my partner as well. So to me, that COAL acronym feels like a little bit of a supportive structure as you think about how can you bring in curiosity, because it doesn't just stop at curiosity. It's like, okay, then what? Now I'm learning and growing these new things. What do I do with that? And I think just the other parts of being open to that experience and accepting what it means and trying to really lean in with love, which is essentially that compassion that, like, as individuals, we're all just doing our best. We're all trying to figure it out. But as we've been describing on and off through here, is relationships tend to kind of get into their own ways of functioning. And I think curiosity can help be that really not quick, but different interruption that might be needed.
Yeah, yeah. I love hearing that, because I think I heard about COAL from you initially, but I could never remember what it meant. So curiosity, C for curiosity, O for openness, A for acceptance, and then L for love. That's really helpful to kind of know that this is just kind of a starting point, and you can kind of cycle through those different concepts and apply them to your relationship in different ways as you go along. I like that. And hopefully that's something that maybe we can continue a conversation about in the future. But I loved having this conversation with you. I know that you and I could nerd out for a while longer, but
Sure.
we'll wrap this part up here. Thanks for joining on this conversation that we can hopefully have together, that hopefully can benefit other people, or at least get some minds a little more curious about the possibility of being curious. And so we'll be curious to hear other people's thoughts. Yeah. I'll give y'all a rest on all the curious.
Good. It's good.
Dad jokes here. Dad joke central. All right. Well, thanks, Mandy. Appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Well, thank you, Sapna. It was great to have this conversation with you. And I think going forward, I will have a group through Zession, which is the Curious Couple. So throw in curious
for
one more
that
time
up. Yes,
here.
Mandy, is there ways that we can learn more about this?
But the group is created for couples who maybe are feeling the desire for there to be some of that novelty, or just some of that just fresh approach to what their experience has been. I know certainly during the pandemic, there have been a lot of couples that are like, "Oi, we need to change this thing up." And the Curious Couple will be a group where we will, of course, talk about lots of what we talked about today, but then also I'll be sharing lots of resources as well, of just different things that I learned in couples therapy. And I think sometimes having other little snippets to consider can add to those curious moments too, because we're trying to learn. So I'm trying to share resources to help you learn about how this all plays in, perhaps, to your relationship. So you can find me on Zession. I would love to continue the conversation and share any other helpful tips, just so you can, kind of shift the way it feels day to day in your relationships.
Yeah. I love hearing that. I love hearing that there is a place for people to go to get those resources. And you're saying group, right? You mean like it is a kind of virtual place in which people who, or couples especially, who are curious or wanting to work on becoming more curious can go for additional resources from you and things that you post that you think can be helpful for evoking more curiosity, right?
Yeah, you got it.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for
Nice,
sharing that
absolutely.
as well.
Thank you.
And hopefully people will be able to see the benefit of joining such a group, because there's so many ways that we can continue to be curious. But like we said, it can be challenging to get into that headspace and stay there. So thanks for those resources.
Awesome.
And
Absolutely.
I'll look forward to seeing what's coming out of that pipeline.
Sounds good. Until next time.
Until next time. Bye.
Bye.